Hello and welcome to another edition of Market Briefing. I'm Martin Bakkerdax, European business editor here at the IB Times UK. And we are going to stick with the UK for much of today's report because we, of course, are looking at the budget statement, the fourth budget statement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, otherwise known as the Finance Minister here in the United Kingdom, George Osborne, setting out his stall for the fiscal trajectory of Europe's second largest economy over the coming years. It wasn't really quite the blockbuster that some had anticipated. Of course, it must be fair to say that everybody anticipated there wasn't going to be a great amount of change. What we were looking for was projections on growth over the next few years, on deficits, and ultimately on the government's supplemental debt target. In other words, when will debt as a proportion of the economy begin to fall? That appears to have been extended out to 2017. Now, that's 2 years longer than first anticipated and 1 year longer than the Office for Budget Responsibility, George Osborne's nonpartisan fiscal watchdog, said back in December. A bit of an embarrassment then for the Chancellor, who, of course, has set this very high with respect to ambitions from the government. Budget deficit will narrow, though, and continues to do so when compared to the record of the previous government. However, borrowing as a result of that is going to rise. Now, that does make some people uncomfortable, but the machinations of accounting for that are very difficult indeed. What's undeniable, however, is that economic growth is going to limp along much slower than first anticipated. We may only grow by 0.6% this year. That is about half of the presumed growth rate that the OBR had predicted back in December. So when they assess it again in 6 months' time, it's anyone's guess as to where that may be. So there's plenty of ammunition for, of course, Mr. Miliband, the leader of the opposition, to take aim at the Chancellor and the Prime Minister David Cameron about the government's economic record. And they did tear into it during the House of Commons debate. Politically, there was a lot of interesting bits underneath. They have some ramifications, really more for domestic politics than they do for the international growth assumptions of the UK economy. There's stuff in there for new build home buyers. There is some reductions on tax rates for alcohol, beer in particular, and a freezing of the fuel duty. There's some other bits and pieces in there that are worth looking at, including a reduction of the corporate tax rate. But probably the most interesting from the domestic political front is the lifting of the lowest rate of tax threshold to £10,000 1 year earlier. That basically means anybody earning £10,000 or less will pay no income tax whatsoever beginning in 2014. That's a relatively expensive morsel inside the multi-billion-pound budget, but nonetheless, it's one the Chancellor feels comfortable he's going to be able to maintain by getting bits and pieces from elsewhere in the economy, because he described the budget as fiscally neutral. Now, if we look at market reaction, it hasn't been that terrific. We had sterling moving in and out during the statement, FTSE 100 effectively unchanged, and bond yields dropping just a little bit. Now, the reason for that might be because the change in the Bank of England's remit, which is at, of course, the purview of the Chancellor each and every year, was indeed set out in the House of Commons, but it wasn't that spectacular. The inflation target is going to remain at around 2%. There'd be a little bit of flexibility in and around that, but there was the encouragement for the Bank of England to use more extraordinary measures. Now, that might mean ramping up quantitative easing, but it might mean an extension of the funding for lending program. Either way, there is some assumption from investors that bond yields will be supported or continue to be supported by the Bank of England's asset purchase program. That lifts the prices and, of course, drops the yield. After the Chancellor's statement, the Debt Management Office, which effectively manages the gilt sales for the UK government, said they're going to see about 163 billion in sterling in gross issuance for the 2013 tax year. That's a little bit less than analysts had anticipated. So again, supportive of bond prices, and that keeps the yields down. Do take a look at the IB Times economy page. My colleague Shane Croucher has a very fascinating live blog which details everything that I've spoken about, and he'll have a wrap-up for it very, very soon indeed. That's it for us today. See you tomorrow.